record. Okay. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Welcome to the Illuminating series. My name is Holly, and I am the Community Engagement Coordinator at Lumina Hospice and Palliative Care. We also have today Micah with Care Partners as co-host. She'll be helping us out monitoring the chat today. This series is a monthly seminar that takes place every third Tuesday. We have various experts on life topics such as healthy aging, advanced care planning, caregiving, and other end-of-life topics. And for those of you who have joined us in the past, things might look a little bit different today and for the rest of this year, because Lumina is partnering with the other hospices in the Alliance, which is the Oregon Nonprofit Hospice Alliance, or ONA, you may hear us call it. And we're doing that to kind of broaden our scope and bring in some new and exciting presenters that we may not have had before. So I hope you'll all join us for more topics throughout the year. And next month, we will be discussing exercise and caring for the caregiver. So for today's presentation, we're going to be hearing from Athena about cooking and nutrition for self-care. And so if you do have any questions throughout, go ahead or comments, go ahead and put those in the chat, and we will get to those as time allows. And of course, a recording will be available afterwards. And if anybody has registered, whether or not you're here present right now, you'll get an email with the recording and then any other resources that we might share today. So before we get started, and while I give a little bio about our presenter, I'm going to launch a quick poll here just to see who is in the room with us today. So go ahead and answer that based on why you're here today. Okay, so a little background about our presenter today. Athena is a registered dietitian nutritionist who has been with Lumina for 5 years. Athena is a board certified specialist in oncology and has been a clinical dietitian throughout her career with experience in diabetes management, heart disease, and palliative care. Okay, it looks like just about everybody has answered, so I'm going to end the poll there. So we've got about a quarter family caregivers, quarter hospice staff and volunteers, and then the rest are other category. All right, I will add Athena, and then I'm gonna pop out here and I'll hand it off to you.
Okay, thank you. All right. Well, thank you for having me and the introduction. Let's see here. There we go. So what I'm going to and the difference between acute and chronic inflammation, and then discuss how this inflammation affects. Sorry, my computer's popping up that I don't have good internet, so I'm getting a little alarmed right now. I'm going to discuss the effects of stress on inflammation, and then quickly review the anti-inflammatory diet, and then talk about some easy ways to incorporate more anti-inflammatory foods into your diet. And then I have a little interactive activity around that. And then if time allows at the end, I just wanted to talk a little bit about intuitive or mindful eating tools for self-care. So we'll see how far we get in the last section. Okay, so you may have heard the word inflammation, like when you've gone, to the doctor, gone to different appointments within the health systems. And so really, inflammation is our immune system's first response to an insult or injury. And so I want to explain the difference between acute and chronic inflammation. So acute inflammation is when we get a burn, a chemical irritant, a bacteria or a virus, a physical injury, allergic reaction, hives, swelling. Those are all acute. That's all acute inflammation. When we talk about chronic inflammation, that's more along the lines of when we have a chronic health condition. And so this can be a variety of things. Arthritis is one that seems to be like, that's the one we can probably feel the most physically. Like, you just know, like sometimes when you have arthritis, your joints are chronically inflamed. But other examples are diabetes, heart disease, cancer, kidney disease, autoimmune diseases, and cardiovascular disease. So really the main difference there, when I go back to, saying it's our immune system's first response with an acute injury, like let's say, I get a cut on my thumb and it gets inflamed and red, and then it heals and the inflammation goes away. So that's kind of where that acute definition comes from. Chronic is when we have some type of insult or injury to our bodies and it's ongoing. Our body is in that chronic state of trying to fix it. So that's where the word chronic inflammation comes from. So I like to use the example of high blood pressure and heart disease. This should say high sodium intake. Well, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. These are different examples of inflammation. So we've got heart disease, high cholesterol intake, high blood pressure, diabetes, high blood sugars damage our vessel walls, and then other inflammatory conditions. So irritable bowel syndrome, Crohn's, rheumatoid arthritis, all of those things where your body is in that chronic state of trying to repair itself. So this is where I want to get into my blood pressure example. So let's say, I eat a high sodium diet. I have high blood pressure. So there's blood pushing against the artery walls. And you can see in the one picture that there's some damaged lining of the arteries. And it's red and inflamed and cracked. And so our body does what it's supposed to do. It goes out and fixes it. And unfortunately, in this situation, it's in the form of plaque. But basically, that's like a version of scar tissue trying to heal that damage to our artery wall. And so then let's say I keep eating a high salt diet. So my blood pressure stays up. And so I keep having that damage to my artery walls, and my body still has to go out and fix it and repair it and make more of this scar tissue or plaque. And eventually then the artery wall becomes blocked. So that's the blood pressure example I like to use. It's that chronic state of trying to fix itself. Like I said, the diabetes example, if we have high blood sugars, that's damaging our artery walls, maybe damaging other parts of our body. Because I work in oncology, I use cancer as an example frequently. It's really, we do some type of damage, whether it's with, lifestyle or diet or some type of, environmental exposure, something like that, where our body's in that chronic state of repair. That's the chronic inflammation. So let's move that over to, emotional stress. Because thinking about, when I was putting this presentation together, gearing this towards caregivers, caregivers are under a lot of stress, but I think these slides can relate to anybody who has any amount of stress in their life. So when we have chronic stress, this leads to increased cortisol levels. And so when we have more cortisol in our body, this increases that inflammatory response throughout your whole body. Depression is associated with elevated levels of C-reactive protein and interleukin-6 and interleukin-1. You don't need to remember any of those words. They're really just measures of inflammation in our body. And so when we have these higher levels of these, inflammatory cytokines or markers, that just increases our, overall inflammation. And so that can increase our risk of those chronic health conditions I was talking about. So chronic inflammation is kind of funny. It's one of those things, is it like, was it the chicken or the egg first? Do we have the chronic conditions because of the chronic inflammation, or we have the chronic condition and that leads to the inflammation. You can kind of go back and forth on that. Okay, so then just a little more information on this. So prolonged stress and depression can lead to increased risk of infection, prolonged infection and delayed wound healing. So that kind of goes back to that inflammation piece. So we have that interleukin-6 that I was talking about is called a pro-inflammatory cytokine. We are supposed to have those. They're secreted by our cells as part of our immune response. So they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, but it's if they're chronically being produced, that's when it becomes an issue. So stress and depression can also promote more of the cytokine production. Stress, which disturbs our sleep, promotes more of that inflammatory cytokine production. And then chronic stress can just create long-term changes in how we produce those cytokines. So there's one study that I saw that it was a 6-year study, and this interleukin-6 cytokine was 4 times higher in caregivers for a spouse with dementia. So just kind of, making that point of that, all the things that we go through as caregivers or as just people dealing with depression and stress, our body is in a chronic state of trying to fix itself when we're going through those times. So relating that to food a little bit, within an hour of eating, let's say a high fat meal, and I chose that as an example because often, when we are under a lot of stress, we don't choose to eat carrots, right? We want something that sugar because it makes our brain happy. We choose a high fat meal because it's very satiating. We like how it tastes. We like the mouthfeel on our tongues. So tend to choose more high fat meals. The fat is in our blood and it's elevated for 5 to 6 hours. So when we eat a high fat meal, it floods the body with triglycerides, which increase those markers that I was talking about earlier, that C-reactive protein and interleukin-6. And then stress prolongs and increases how long those fats are in our blood after we eat a meal. So they're elevated after we eat, which is normal, but then they stay elevated because of the increased stress our body is having. And then on top of that, stress also alters how we digest foods. Many of us who are under stress, we know that, our digestion is not different. We maybe have more constipation or more upset stomach, more nausea. So it's changing how alters our gastric motility. And so if we're not moving food through like we normally would, then the high fat meal takes longer to work through our system. So those blood levels remain elevated. And then just one last thing, the vagus nerve activation is important in regulation of blood sugars after meals and insulin response. Stress and depression have a negative effect on how well that vagus nerve activation works. So sharing a lot of that information just for your knowledge, but I want to move on to, I feel like that information can get a little bit down, well, thanks for that. So let's move on to, what are some things we can do about it? So, when we talk about I'll be talking a little bit about an anti-inflammatory diet. Also, you can use the word the Mediterranean diet, but those diets have been shown to lower those inflammatory markers I was talking about, reduce cortisol. If we're working on, it sounds like you guys are going to be learning more about exercise next time. The more we can increase our muscle mass versus our fat mass, that's going to lower those inflammatory markers, reduce cortisol, and then just overall, improves blood sugars, improves cholesterol, which reduces overall inflammation. So this is just a couple of studies that I was going to share some information about. There was a group of people following a Mediterranean diet for 5 weeks. They had lower measures of inflammation after those 5 weeks. So I like to bring that one up because it kind of shows like it doesn't mean you have to be on a diet for years in order to get some type of results. It can happen pretty quickly. Another 12-week trial, this was a healthy diet, exercise, and stress reduction, reduced inflammation levels. And then once the trial was over, those inflammation numbers went back up. And then a Mediterranean diet, anti-inflammatory diet may reduce, risk of heart disease, lowers cholesterol levels. There's improved diabetes management, and all of those things just improve overall inflammation. Okay, so what are foods that increase inflammation? So this is a list of the pro-inflammatory foods. So saturated fats, so those are the fats that come from eating animal products. So eating a lot of, high fat meats, a lot of cheeses, a lot of high fat dairy products, hydrogenated fats and trans fats. Those are really more in our processed foods. The big place you will remember them from is, they were in the margarine. And all it is they took a vegetable oil, moved a hydrogen on it to make it solid at room temperature, because at that time we knew that plant-based oils were better for our hearts than animal fats. And so we like a spread that's solid at room temperature. And so once you moved this hydrogen, you got that nice spread texture. It was used a lot on crackers because it gives you that nice mouthfeel. And then over time, we learned that the hydrogenated fats and trans fats also increased inflammation and increased heart disease risk. I don't see them as much in our food, especially if you're working on trying to eat less processed foods. A lot of simple sugars. So when I say simple sugars, I mean things like, sugar sweetened beverages, a lot of like junk food sugars, candy, cookie, added sugars, adding extra, white sugar, brown sugar, honey, all those things, adding those extra sugars to your food. Those are all simple sugars. Fruits, grains, even if it's, white bread, even like potatoes, all of those things fall under complex carbohydrates. So it's really more of like added sugars we drink, and junk food type sugars fall in that simple sugars category. Processed meats, excess alcohol intake, and then excess salt intake. So those are all kind of the pro-inflammatory foods. So this is a list of the basics of an anti-inflammatory diet. I'm going to get into a little bit more on some of the pieces of it, but this is kind of the basics. So utilizing fresh foods as much as possible. So working more towards eating foods that are less processed. But, I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit more, because I think a combination of choosing some whole foods and processed foods is kind of a tool that can be used if you're really busy as a caregiver. Working towards 2.5 to 3 cups of vegetables a day. Most people tell me that that's a lot of vegetables, that they don't eat that many servings. So that's going to be like a cup of leafy greens. If we talk servings, a half a cup of cooked vegetables is considered a serving, and then a cup of raw is considered a serving. And then 1.5 to 2 cups of fruit per day. Usually, I get some concern around that because, we've been told to like reduce our carbohydrate intake for so long that people feel like that's too much fruit. And it really isn't. Especially if you're spreading it out throughout the day. So if you have, one serving of fruit with breakfast, and then maybe a serving with lunch and an afternoon snack, if you spread it out, that's going to change, your insulin response, blood sugar response. So that isn't too much fruit or carbohydrate to have throughout a day. Incorporating seafood 3 times per week, following an overall low-fat diet. I'm going to talk a little bit more about fats. Changing your ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s, choosing more low-fat dairy products, unprocessed grains, and being mindful of your simple and added sugars. Okay, so I always start with the fruits and vegetables because those are the big piece on a anti-inflammatory diet, working on getting all those fruits and vegetables in. The American Institute for Cancer Research recommends 5 to 9 servings of fruits and vegetables a day. So that's a lot of produce. So I'd like to start with that. So I make sure that we talk about that first and it doesn't get missed. So fruit and vegetable intake may reduce physiological stress, and may, like obviously if you're under a significant amount of stress, eating a salad is probably not going to make you feel better at that time, but it's just the idea of getting all those antioxidants in, the vitamins and minerals to help your body, you know, function as it should. Antioxidants are anti-inflammatory. So vitamin E, vitamin C, polyphenols, which are in grapes, apples, pears, cherries, berries, coffee, tea, red wine, may reduce oxidation and inflammation. Magnesium is associated with lower levels of C-reactive protein. That C-reactive protein increases when there's inflammation in the body. A deficiency in folic acid is associated with depression. And then low levels of some vitamins can cause high homocysteine levels, which impair the pathways that affect mood. And I didn't put in a list here, you know, it's like, what are the food sources of magnesium? What do we need to eat for folic acid? Because really you want to eat a variety. So eating, you know, you hear the term eat from the rainbow. Instead of focusing on certain fruits and vegetables, eating a variety so that you get, you know, nutrients from all of them. They all have a little bit of a different nutrient and vitamin mineral content. So really working on that variety of sources and variety of colors. And then really, you know, people who are eating more fruits and vegetables, the kind of, you know, if you're filling up on all that produce, the rest of it kind of also tends to fall in place. We don't have as much space in our bellies for some of the other things. And then if we're really working on that, we tend to choose more anti-inflammatory foods. Okay, so I am now going to get into a little bit about the different food groups or pieces of the anti-inflammatory diet. So I'm going to start, you know, with protein. So I'm going to talk about this for a few minutes because I know when you hear anti-inflammatory diet, along those lines tends to follow a plant-based diet. And so I want to talk about that for a few minutes. So the Mediterranean diet recommends eating fish at least twice a week. You know, we've heard for a long time to eat salmon because of the omega-3. Again, back to that variety piece. Yes, you want to get salmon because of the omega-3, but also choosing, you know, tuna and other fish that you enjoy because you get a variety of different nutrients from them. It's a lean protein. Poultry, pork, red meat can also be included. They don't need to be excluded out of an anti-inflammatory diet. It's more about the portion sizes of those that we choose. You know, you think about a lot of us, if we have steak and potatoes, half of our plate is steak, half of our plate is potatoes. Whereas if we had that 3-ounce portion of steak, had, you know, half a cup to a cup of potatoes and steamed broccoli and a salad with it, that's a completely different meal. So those things can be still included and part of an anti-inflammatory diet. And then really limiting your intake of processed meats. Processed meats do increase inflammation. And so this particular study that, oops, sorry, I keep pushing the space bar to advance, was really showed that it was the red meats that increased inflammation, comparing them with red meat. So it wasn't necessarily the saturated fat intake. It was more in this particular study that it was really the processed meats. So bacon, sausage, ham, hot dogs, salami, lunch meat, other cured meats. And I think, you know, now and then having a piece of bacon is fine. Now and then having a hot dog is fine. It's really when we get into those studies that show the inflammation, it's daily consumption of those processed foods. Also thinking about, you know, cooking, how we cook our meats. So when let's say we're going to fry a pork chop. And so when we fry it, you know, it's good that way. We like that, like little bit of caramelization. And when we fry meats at a high temperature, the fats start to break down, the fats start to oxidize, and that's what increases inflammation. And more so than that, like, there's nothing wrong with grilling, just making sure that you're not overdoing it, that you're not charring, that you're not eating that burnt meat, because then you are consuming carcinogens, which increases inflammation. So thinking about how you're cooking your meats also can reduce some inflammation as well. And then including more vegetable proteins. So eating more legumes, beans, nuts. You know, I do encourage people to maybe have, you know, a vegetarian meal a couple days a week. So there are some studies out there, that show that following vegetarian, vegan diets can reduce heart disease, can reduce cancer risk, may help improve blood sugars, may help reduce arthritis. And I think the thing is, most of these studies, when I read them, somebody's doing a 180 diet change. So they're eating a very high fat, high processed food, high sugar diet, and then making this extreme diet change. And so they do get these results. I think I like to use the word plant strong instead of, vegetarian or vegan, because if you're really working on getting in those fruits and vegetables I was talking about, picking lean proteins, eating more whole grains, you're going to get these same benefits. So overall message here is to eat more plants. Okay, moving on to dairy. So dairy can increase inflammation if you are choosing high fat dairy sources. So thinking about, eating a lot of ice cream, or, maybe coffee drinks with a lot of cream, those kinds of things, that can increase inflammation. If you have lactose intolerance and you continue to eat lactose and that's upsetting your digestive system, that would kind of be an example of chronic inflammation. So if you don't tolerate dairy, you should eliminate it. But the calcium and protein in dairy may have a protective effect. It's part of the DASH diet. Calcium is protective against certain cancer types. Making sure that we're getting enough iron in our diet is healthy. So a low-fat dairy product can definitely continue to be part of your meal plan if you wish. So these are, examples of low-fat dairy foods. Okay, and then I'm going to move on to the grains, or, I threw in carbohydrates, but I'm really going to focus on grains for a minute. So carbohydrates can be anti-inflammatory. I know that seems counterintuitive because we've heard for so long, to cut back on our carbohydrate intake. And we've been, hearing about low carb diets for such a long time, whether it, be Atkins or paleo. Keto is really popular right now. So we just, every couple of years, a new low carb diet comes out. So it really feels like when I talk about eating fruit and eating potatoes or eating some grains, like that's, we shouldn't be doing that. But really thinking about eating more whole grains like quinoa, bulgur, millet. They're good sources of fiber. Which is really good for a healthy gut. They have lots of good phytochemicals in them. Increasing fiber and protein in your diet with beans and lentils. And really, it's not that carbohydrates are bad. It's typically our choices. What kind of carbohydrates are we choosing? So I have some pictures to show you about some different carbohydrate foods. So this is maybe like a typical, pantry, maybe someone's typical pantry. And you think about this, like everything's in a box or a can, has added sugars, may have added fats to it, but they're all carbohydrate sources. We've got noodles, we have cookies, we've got juice. There's some type of cookie dough bar there. So they're all carbohydrate sources. But it's probably more about like how they're packaged. How are we eating them? What sources of carbohydrates are they? And then just doing like, a comparison here, we've got a cupcake and a donut compared to Raisin Bran, a cup of oats, a whole wheat piece of pita bread. And then taking it one step further into whole grains, like again, getting into those like quinoas, bulgurs, rices, those kinds of things as sources of grains, which would be anti-inflammatory. Okay. And we can't talk about grains without talking about gluten for a minute. So there is a lot of concern that, wheat itself increases inflammation. If you have celiac disease or gluten intolerance, those are chronic inflammatory conditions. And if you continue to consume gluten is actually the protein in wheat. If you continue to consume gluten, that does increase inflammation. So some of the things that, people will experience is, the common GI symptoms that we hear about, but also, arthritis, more fibromyalgia. So it's all that kind of chronic inflammatory things going on. Sorry, my chat box is covering up my my words here. So again, like I said, there's increased inflammation in individuals who consume wheat or have celiac disease or intolerance to wheat. And then wheat consumed as more of the refined processed products. So cookies, donuts, crackers, cake. They increase inflammation due to their fat and sugar content. So it's not specifically the wheat itself necessarily. Okay, moving on to fats for a minute. We've heard, used to hear for a long time just to, cut out saturated fats, cut out more animal fats. But over time, we've learned that we want to balance our combination of omega-6 and omega-3s. Maybe supplementing omega-3, so maybe taking like fish oil might help improve inflammation. And then thinking about cooking techniques again. So you've heard probably like smoke point of different oils and fats. So you think about like if you're using olive oil and you put it in a hot pan, and sometimes it'll get a funny smell. Or it's green and then all of a sudden it's no longer green anymore. So when that happens, really you've heated the oil too hot. It's reached its smoke point and the fats are starting to break down. So that is a source of inflammation. So olive oil really should be more of a lower temperature cooking oil. I typically recommend having on hand a combination of olive and canola. The canola oil tolerates some higher temperature cooking. You can use the olive oil for a lower temperature saute, or, tossing a pasta salad, or making, doing salad dressing. But if you want a high temperature oil, I recommend the canola, or there's other ones. You can have avocado oil, but, in regards to like budget and wallets, I think the canola and olive oil are a good combo to have on hand. Okay, and then bringing this back to, fats and our mood. So omega-6 fats, those are the ones that increase inflammation. They're in more of our refined oils, and they can increase those pro-inflammatory cytokines. Omega-6 and omega-3 compete for the same pathway. So that's why you get that anti-inflammatory benefit if you are consuming more of the omega-3s instead of the omega-6s. Omega-3s are from fish, walnuts, wheat germ, and flax. There are some studies out there that show that eating more fish may reduce depression. And then people with depression tend to have lower plasma levels of omega-3s. So just, working on increasing your intake of omega-3 may be helpful. Okay, so then I have this chart here because I do get the question a lot of, how much, ALA, how many omega-3s do I need? So there's not really an established recommended amount for omega-3 acids. Usually if someone wants to take an omega-3 supplement or fish oil, I think 2 grams a day or 2,000 milligrams a day is a good number to start with. And then you get a combination of the AHA and ALA fats within that fish oil supplement. And you'll get these, recommended amounts if you're taking that much. Okay, and then coconut oil is one that it's kind of conflicting information out there. If you Google it, it really talks a lot about how it's anti-inflammatory. We process it differently. It is a saturated fat, so it may help to increase your LDL, that's your good cholesterol, but also increases your total cholesterol. And there's really conflicting research in regards to benefits of coconut oil. I was just reading an article the other day that talked about like there's no proven benefits for like blood sugar control, improvement in heart disease, benefits for weight loss. So I think if you want to use coconut oil because it tolerates high temperature cooking, nothing wrong with that. But like adding it into things or adding it in as a supplement, I know for a while, like adding it to coffee was pretty popular, adding it to smoothies. That is not something I would recommend because then you're just increasing your total fat intake, which can increase inflammation. There's flaxseed oil. It's a good source of omega-3. Has been shown to improve some lipid profiles in some rodent studies. You want to use, if you're going to use ground, if you're not going to use the oil, but if you want to use, the flax seeds, it needs to be ground. We do not digest whole flax seeds. And then getting 1 to 2 tablespoons per day has been shown to have some anti-inflammatory benefit. Store it in the refrigerator, especially after you've ground it. And then you do not want to cook with flaxseed oil. It has a very low smoke point, so it doesn't tolerate cooking. So it's more something that you would maybe add in, to salad dressing, something like that. Chia seeds are something you could add in for some anti-inflammatory benefit. They have some omega-3s in them. There is some shown health benefits in regards to blood sugars, lipid profiles, may promote weight loss. These can be stored at room temperature. They don't have to be ground. And again, working on that 1 to 2 tablespoons per day to get the anti-inflammatory benefit. Okay, and like I kind of already alluded to, a low-fat diet overall appears to have the most benefit in regards to inflammation rate, instead of, really focusing on the fat sources, because even if we're choosing really healthy fats, let's say olive oil, but we're eating too much of them, that will increase inflammation. And then back to that variety. So if you want to use olive oil, or coconut oil for high temperature cooking, and then having getting some flax in, using olive oil for cooking, you get different vitamins and minerals from different sources of oils too. This is just a chart of the different smoke points of the oils. We can send this out if you're interested in it. Okay, so then kind of bringing this back, you may have seen this plate here before. And then over here, I also have a pyramid. So you may remember when you learned in school, I like to show this pyramid because in school, we learned that the grains were on the bottom of the pyramid. And so this one has your fruits and vegetables on the bottom. So kind of really having that, getting all those fruits and veggies in for the anti-inflammatory benefit. And then above that is some of your whole grains, and then moving on to your nuts, beans, legumes, fish, seafood. So just kind of as an example of maybe how the food grade pyramid has changed a little bit. And then the picture of this plate. So I know this can seem really basic. I really like this plate, especially, if you don't have time to cook a lot. This does not need to be like, you can put some things on this plate really, easily without doing a lot of food prep. So basically, when we're talking about this, a quarter of your plate should be your protein, a quarter of your plate should be your grains, a quarter your fruit, a quarter vegetables, and then, serving of dairy on the side. Thinking about combination dishes. So let's say I'm having spaghetti for dinner. Half of my plate is going to be the noodles and the, let's say, ground beef. And then the other half of my plate, let's say I'm going to have some steamed broccoli and maybe, I don't know, an orange with it or something. Or you could do half a plate of vegetables and a fruit on the side. This isn't an exact science. It's really more just about how it looks on our plate. So thinking about the spaghetti example again, normally when we eat spaghetti, it takes up our whole plate, and then maybe we have a side salad and a piece of French bread with it. So instead, have your spaghetti, have it take up half your plate, and then add in your fruits and your vegetables with it, or have half a plate of vegetables. Hamburger can fit on here. My hamburger is going to be the protein and the grain. And then I'm going to have, I don't know, fruit salad and carrots with it or something. So still eating some of the same foods that you're already eating, just making them look a little bit different on your plate to get that anti-inflammatory benefit. Instead of thinking about, I have to change everything. Keep eating some of the things you're already eating and then just modify a little bit. Okay, so I think my next, oh, yes, let's do this real fast. And then there's a question on, get honey from local. Okay, so there's a question on honey. Yeah, so, okay. The question is that we get honey from local honey that has no added sugar. I thought natural honey was supposed to be good for your immune system. So I don't think that, thinking about sugars and added sugars, I go back to that, like sugar is sugar is sugar. We break it all down into glucose. So there's nothing wrong with honey. You might get a little bit of added benefit from choosing a local honey, and yes, it's good that it doesn't have added sugar in it, but it still is sugar. It still is sugar that you're adding to your food, which there's nothing wrong with. It's just something to be mindful of. And when we're talking about just carbohydrate foods in general, and honey falls into that, thinking about things that are good for your immune system, I'm going to make the comparison of, adding a teaspoon of honey to my tea or eating a cup of blueberries. So the cup of blueberries, I get the fiber, I get all the roughage. I don't digest it as quickly as I do the honey. So I don't have as much of a blood sugar and insulin response. I get all the antioxidants. Yes, I know some honey is promoted as having antioxidants in it, which it probably does, but not compared to having a cup of blueberries. I didn't get into like the glycemic response, and I'm running out of time, but that's kind of the quick and dirty of my answer about the honey. Okay, so quick and easy anti-inflammatory tips. So I just wanted to give you guys some ideas of how to get in more of that produce without spending your lives in the kitchen, because I know you're busy. So one of the things I like to talk about is planning your meals around your vegetables and fruits, because people tell me a lot, like, well, I bought all this produce like you told me to, and then it went bad. Well, you have to eat it. If you don't get it in your body, then yeah, it's going to go bad in the fridge. So one way to work around that is, instead, we always plan our meals around the protein we're having. Like, okay, we're going to have chicken. So what are we going to have with chicken? Instead of that, we have lots of carrots and we need to eat them. So what are we going to have with our carrots tonight? So planning your meals around your fruits and vegetables, using a combination of canned, frozen fruits, and veggies. Frozen veggies are easy to throw in the microwave and easy to throw in a pan to saute. Choosing some canned fruits in their own juice to get that serving of fruit in. You've got the microwave bagged veggies now that you throw in the microwave already in the bags, the veggie steamers or something like that. Buying chopped vegetables. You can buy, I see chopped broccoli, chopped cabbage, shredded carrots. Do some of those things to make it easy so that you will get more of those veggies in. Veggie trays are a great way to do it. Just buy a veggie tray. And if you don't want to do the ranch, grab some hummus to go with it. That way, you're working through getting a couple extra servings of veggies in throughout the day. Fruit bowls that are cut up. Salad kits are a good one. Getting some trail mix, having nuts and pumpkin seeds on hand to snack on. Canned beans, nothing wrong with eating canned beans. Most of us are not going to take the time to cook dry beans. So including those canned beans is a great way to get in protein, fiber. Tofu is not for everybody. I tend to eat tofu on the nights when I, don't have a meal plan, because it's very quick and easy and I make it into a stir fry. So I like to have it as a backup quick meal. It's also really good roasted. Like, if I'm going to do roasted veggies, I just cube up some tofu, throw it in with there, toss it with olive oil, salt, pepper, and roast it off. And I like tofu in that fashion. A rice cooker is a good way to cook your grains. So, if you're going to, let's say you're going to try this tofu saute or roasted tofu and veggies, and then you're going to throw some rice in your rice cooker and try to, get a quick and easy dinner that way. But you can cook other grains, quinoa, cook your quinoa in a rice cooker and then add some veggies and a little Italian dressing and you've got a salad. One pot meals are great because then you've got your grains, your veggies, and a lean protein, and then making extra so you have leftovers. using canned salmon, frozen fish fillets, frozen veggie burgers. On really busy days, get some frozen plant-based meals, cottage cheese with fruit and veggies, fruit and yogurt, cheese sticks and fruit. And then there is some space in there, I think, for some convenience food. So you can get the microwave quinoa and rice, microwave rice cups. There's some of those grains that you can definitely throw in the microwave to make this more simple and easy and less time consuming. So I know that I didn't get into a lot of cooking and like meal planning in general, but I wanted to give you these tips and kind of show you that plate, because that is, if someone asks me about meal planning, that is typically what I recommend, is that you can use this plate. I think I get very simple about it when I talk about meal planning. Like, okay, I'm not going to use any fancy apps. I just want you to take a piece of paper and draw like 5 plates on it, blank plates, put the quadrants in them, and then write out what you have in your house already that you can put in the quadrants of the plate. So, if I think about what I have in my house right now, I know I have some frozen chicken breast in the freezer, and I know I have a big thing of mixed greens I need to eat. So just kind of thinking like, what do you have and how can you put it into those quadrants on the plate? So if you guys are open to doing a quick little game with me, I like to call it What's in Your Freezer. So if you could type in the chat one thing you have in your freezer, and then maybe put in there too, like some other items you have in your fridge that could go around it. So kind of just what I did. Like I just said, I had some chicken in my freezer, and I know that I have these couple things in my fridge that I need to eat. That's the thing, in order to get through the produce, like what is in my fridge that I need to eat and what can it go with, how can it go with other foods? So if anybody's brave, go ahead and put what's in your freezer in the chat. Shrimp. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So shrimp, you could do the little microwaved rice. You could add, maybe some canned fruit. You could saute up some frozen veggies. You can just use fresh fruit, veggie lasagna, bagged vegetables, and lean cuisine meals. Great. A veggie lasagna and your bagged vegetables, you've already got 2 pieces or 3 pieces of that. You've got your protein, your veggies, and your starch. Lean cuisine meals are good. Usually those are, I want to say they're more protein and starch. So you could easily pair a fruit and vegetable with that. You just a fruit cup or an apple and some, maybe a little bag of carrots, those kinds of things. Frozen veggies and shrimp, perfect. Frozen blueberries, like to add them to a chicken salad. Nice. Tilapia, broccoli, mixed berries. Yep, there you go. You got it. You got your meal. Steak, mushrooms, and Brussels sprouts. Yep. Frozen fish fillet and frozen beans. Yes. Yeah. So with that one, maybe just think about like a fruit or some type of quick, easy starch you could add, like maybe a microwave baked potato. Crab. Nice. Salmon and riced cauliflower. You've got your protein, you got your veggie. So what kind of, grain are you going to add to that? Good. Shrimp, frozen chicken, frozen salmon, frozen peas, broccoli. Yeah. You've got lots of meal pieces in there. That's perfect. Yeah. Yep. So you've got your proteins, you've got a starch in your peas, you've got a veg for your broccoli, lasagna, and a vegetable. Yeah. Good. So I hope that's helpful, that you can kind of just easily pair some things together without, having to come up with fancy recipes and make meal planning difficult. I know when you get online and get into like different, programs and apps, it can feel overwhelming because it feels like you have to buy all these special ingredients and go shopping for all the foods, and, maybe just looking at what you already have and how can you combine your meals around that. The other thing I like to do with these plates is if I draw out the plates, let's say I do 5 of them, fill in the quadrants, And then I make my shopping list directly from that. So if I've planned my 5 meals with my plates, I write down as I'm going what I need at that time. So then I know exactly what I need. I get it back in the house. So that helps with, okay, tonight we're having, chicken. Oh, this happens a lot, right? Like we're like, okay, we're going to have chicken and rice. Oh, we don't have rice. Oh, the chicken's still frozen. Let's just go get pizza, but which still happens, that we're human beings, but having your meals planned out and then having your shopping list ready to rock and roll can help with a lot of that. Okay, how much time do I have left? Okay, bummer. I wanted to get into more of the mindful eating activities, but maybe I could come back another time. So I would like to do questions for the last few minutes, if you have any questions for me.
I haven't seen any questions yet, but I give people time to type.
Okay, what are some breakfast ideas? Okay, Robin, go ahead. Or can I'd come back for another mindful eating session. Great. Okay, good. I hate eggs.
Yeah, so we had a question. What are some breakfast ideas besides eggs? I think even if you don't like eggs, it might be, cholesterol might be a concern for some people.
Right. Yeah. So I think, other people could chime in here too with their breakfast ideas, but there's, I'm going to stop this so that I can see faces. There's lots of hot cereals, there's oats, the whole grain cereals, English muffins, bagels, overnight oats. You can make breakfast dishes out of quinoa. I'm so sad you hate eggs. I love eggs.
Robin, did you have a question? I can oh, there you go.
Thanks. Yeah. I wanted to ask about the contribution of alcohol consumption to inflammation. Could you talk a little bit about what that means?
Yeah.
And I know for women, you're only supposed to have a couple of drinks. Oh, and is there like a better kind of alcohol?
Right.
Or for the anti-inflammatory diet?
Sure. Good question. Yeah. So there's different, depending on, what issue we're looking at, there's different recommendations. So if you do think about the American Heart Association, they say limit to 1 alcohol drink for women, 1 to 2 for men. It's hard to quantify that completely, because if you do have more like arthritis or gout, people who have that, they know if they have a drink, even 1, that it increases inflammation. If I think about the recommendations for cancer prevention, it really is, there's not like, it's okay to have 1. I mean, it's fine. Like but if you look at the American Cancer Society, American Institute for Cancer Research, there isn't a recommended, it's really just recommended to not drink alcohol because it increased risk of many cancer types. So it depends on what guidelines you're looking at. So I think that, I'm never going to say don't ever drink. I enjoy a nice beer and I enjoy a glass of wine. I don't know that there's a particular healthiest alcoholic drink. They all increase inflammation. We do hear that red wine has some anti-inflammatory properties because of the resveratrol in it. So that might be the healthiest one to choose, but yeah, I know it's a sad answer. I like red wine.
We had another question in the chat. As far as fish goes, is tilapia a very healthy choice?
Yeah, I know there's concern about tilapia because of what it eats. So again, I think it comes back to that. I don't think there's anything wrong with eating tilapia. You want to make a variety of choices. So have salmon, have cod, have tilapia, have shrimp. Tilapia is nice because I don't want to take it off the table because it is one of those really quick and easy frozen fish fillets to prepare. And it's affordable. So, if you're combining it with other, whole grains and vegetables, I think it's completely fine to consume tilapia. How does the Mediterranean diet conflict with or complement a kidney disease diet? That's a hard one. That's definitely one where you're going to need to probably meet with a registered dietitian to talk about what are, because you have to be mindful of potassium and phosphorus, and those are in a lot of fruits and vegetables and dairy. So my recommendation would be probably to seek out a dietitian who could work with you on combining both of those diets together. Oh yes, breakfast idea, avocado toast with microgreens. That's delicious. Yay. Good breakfast ideas. Chia pudding with berries. Yeah. Ideas for when you have different dietary requirements or needs within one household. Yeah, that's a big question to answer. But yes, there's a lot of that, especially with caregiving. How many meals are you making? And so, okay, I'm just going to use an example of when I've worked with people who have to prepare a pureed diet for their family members. So let's take the example of, chicken and rice. So you make your chicken and rice for yourself, and then you take that same ingredients and put them into a blender or food processor to make them, the appropriate pureed texture. That's the biggest thing I can recommend, is to not really work hard on not preparing 2 or 3 different meals, but how can you modify one meal so that you're not spending your day in the kitchen. And I know that's not only one example. I would love to sit down with you and talk about what do you have going on specifically, and how can we come up with some suggestions of what can you make that is going to help the whole family, because I do know that's a big barrier, and it takes up a ton of time, and it's exhausting. And so that was part of the reason I put up that slide of the quick tips of, if you're having to make an intense meal for somebody, then have those frozen meals on hand and combine them with, a bag of carrots or a fruit cup. Some of those convenience meals are appropriate in these situations because, you can't do the Food Network. It's not real. So having some of those processed foods on hand, the microwaved rice cups or the quinoa cups, or I've seen now you can get microwave bagged lentils, combining that, let's say, and you have a salad kit, it's quick and easy. And then you've got a nourishing meal for yourself, because you do have to continue to caregive for somebody else.
Okay, are there any other questions? We're just about at time here, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you, Athena, for being our wonderful presenter. That was a lot of helpful information. So we will go ahead and conclude, and we will be sending out an email to all of you that registered. So keep an eye out for that, either today or tomorrow. And feel free to share the recording with anybody that may have missed out today. All right. Thanks, everybody.